Welcome to Real Estate Coaching Radio, starring award-winning real estate coaches and #1 international best-selling authors, Tim and Julie Harris. This is the #1 daily radio show for realtors looking for a no BS, authentic, real-time coaching experience. What's really working in today's market, how to generate more leads, make more money, and have more time for what you love in your life. And now your hosts, Tim and Julie Harris.
Welcome back. Today's topic is master real estate negotiation or get left behind. And before we get to our first point, I want to thank all of you for the great feedback we have on the podcast last Friday. As you know, Julie and I are doing podcast on Fridays that are not our normal fare. Last Friday's podcast was an interview with Keith Jensen about maybe something that was a little bit of a nerdy topic, but a lot of you really seemed to love it. It was about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the fact that they're going to come out of conservatorship. Again, I know, very wonky, but if you've not yet listened to it, you want to listen to it because based on what I learned on that interview on Friday and the research I did leading up to that interview, I do believe that we're going to be seeing, once the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are out of conservatorship, I think it's very possible we're going to see mortgage interest rates drop substantially, new mortgage products drop. We're going to see PMI drop. We're going to see a whole bunch of things that no one really wants to talk about change really quickly as competition enters back into that sector of the real estate industry. So Fannie and Freddie, it does appear, are coming out of conservatorship sometime sooner than later. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you don't know really what that'll mean to your pocketbook and to your real estate market, make sure you listen to last Friday's podcast. So Julie, what motivated you to write this topic for today?
I'm glad you asked. In fact, this has been a special request of several of our listeners, podcast listeners, coaching clients, etc., because negotiating has recently become more of a challenge. You know, when we all lived in the COVID years and pulling out of that, and even in some markets still, they're just basically choosing the right offer. We have multiple offers, not long days on the market. But when that shifts and the house sits around for a little bit, you might be negotiating with a seller to price it differently. You might be negotiating up front thanks to the commission lawsuits. There's all these different things that have cropped up.
Well, you better be negotiating probably to keep the listing if your days in the market is extending.
That too, right? So life has gotten a bit more complicated. And remember that knowledge equals confidence, ignorance equals fear. So to stop fearing the negotiating process, which is, parts of this are new to some of you, you've got to improve your skills. So that's why our goal with this 2-part series on negotiation is to up your skills and give you that confidence. Negotiation happens only when negotiation doesn't only happen when an offer is made, countered, and hopefully accepted, but also, we mentioned a couple of them, pricing it right in the first place, keeping the listing long enough to be the listing agent at the finish line, home inspections, appraisal issues, again, commission things, and lots of other moments before closing.
Well, Julie, this is a good time to remind them that really, frankly, a lot of things in life, but in real estate specifically, you really are negotiating constantly. You're negotiating for closing dates. You're negotiating for, the obvious things like commissions and the list price and the sale price and all these things. But the way that every agent has a really overconfidence in their ability to negotiate. And it's really kind of funny too when Julie and I have done this at live events before. We'll ask agents to write down their top 5 skills, and almost always they write down #1 being negotiation. But really, if you really delved into what really makes for great negotiation, you'll discover that if you're being honest, you're actually the least skilled at negotiation. So what we did is, obviously through hundreds of thousands of coaching calls, Julie and I really studied it. And we read books about it. We talked to psychologists about it. When we were writing our book, Harris Rules, there's a big section about negotiation. And so what we're going to do is we're going to give you our notes today. But the only way you're going to get them is you're going to have to go to harrisrealestatedaily.com and subscribe to the newsletter. These negotiation notes that Julie created, what we're hoping you do is make these into a checklist. And so really, when you're negotiating a purchase contract on your buyer side, you can have obviously the deal points, the negotiation things, and little reminders to yourself how to put something together. Because nowadays it's not just about the price and the closing date and all those normal things. You could be negotiating with the seller and the listing agent over the seller helping the buyer with closing costs and with maybe just the finance rates and just all the things.
Any number of things.
Any number of things. The list is long. But when you're hearing what I'm saying and you're putting yourself mentally and emotionally in a position where you're going to be talking with buyers and sellers about, employing these types of skills, The other way you can use this is just by showing the buyer or the seller that you do have a checklist like this, that you are following a systematic approach to getting them the best price and terms. And then if you're in a competitive situation, which you're always going to be, and they're comparing you against another agent, and you've shown your negotiation plan, your negotiation system, and it's not just something you pull out of your, they're really going to remember that. And they're going to remember that you took an extra level of, if nothing else, of, presentation to show them how thorough you are when it comes to negotiating. These things make a big difference, especially in a competitive situation. Imagine this. It's an expired listing, or it's a buyer that's been working with an agent and the agent's never been able to negotiate a deal to put that buyer in contract, or
they keep losing out, right?
They keep losing out, or the seller basically just fired their previous listing agent because that previous listing agent lost a deal through negotiation. And then you show them your negotiation checklist that you can create from our notes from harrisrealestatedaily.com. And the seller or the buyer is looking at these notes and realizing all the things the other agent didn't even know about, let alone didn't do. You guys get it? So take these notes that we're sharing with you and use them for your own, use, obviously, but then use them for marketing, use them for advertising, use them in your social media. So
you could do videos about it.
Exactly. Yeah. Think expansively about all this stuff, because Julie in particular does take a lot of time on these notes.
All right. So let's first define what negotiation is and what it is not, just to clarify. Negotiation is the process where two or more parties with different needs and goals discuss and find a mutually acceptable solution. In other words, making it to the finish line, getting in contract, getting to the closing table. Negotiation is not, and this is taken right out of realtors' mouths, sometimes sadly online, talking like this. Here's what negotiation is not: bludgeoning the other side into submission, making them cry, getting them to hang up on you, faking them out with manipulative tactics. Avoid saying such things and beware of agents or even clients or prospects who lead with those things that we call non-tactics that don't work.
Well, exactly. And non-tactics, Julie's being very nice with this choice of words. But negotiation, for example, if you're on the buyer side, and let's say you give, you're planning on renegotiating the contract during the home inspection, and that's not really, at the end of the day, that's kind of a slightly sleazy tactic to get maybe the listing agent to accept a higher price, knowing full well you're going to go after the home inspection. You're going to go after lowering the price during a home inspection, things like that. That's not what we're talking about. Those are more what we call manipulative tactics. These negotiation is a style. It's a way you present information in such a way that the other party is going to want to concede or agree with whatever your ask is.
Exactly. It's a mutually acceptable agreement. Now, in order for you to get there, we have, as Tim said, created a checklist for you, and we're going to do this over a 2-part series, what to know before you start to negotiate. We're going to break down negotiation strategies from both the buyer and the seller perspectives. Remember the 7 P's of real estate. Proper previous planning prevents pitifully poor performance.
Say that twice, Julie.
Not too quick. Proper previous planning prevents pitifully poor performance. So over the 2 podcasts today and tomorrow, we're going to talk about things to know about the property. That's number 1. What to know about the seller is number 2. The buyer, number 3. And then we will conclude with how to actually put the deal together.
Now, we do have a very comprehensive, obviously in Premier Coaching, we do have a very comprehensive form that you actually fill out when you receive a contract. And I'm going to tell you guys how we originally wrote this or created this. When Julie and I were selling real estate, and obviously after that when we've been coaching agents, sometimes, and Julie and I had this issue too, it's a nice problem to have, but we'd have oftentimes during peak seasons or peak months of the year, we'd have too many listing appointments. And it would be really, we could go on 3 listing appointments per day, but you're not very good on the 3rd listing appointment. So we eventually had to hire somebody to go on listing appointments for us. And we had to hire somebody, in addition to what we were doing. We had to hire somebody sometimes to help negotiate the buyer contracts. And at the time, we were pulling a lot of our negotiation, we were just sort of following a mental checklist, not anything that was written down, but for us to thoroughly and completely delegate it to the point where maybe all we had to do is just review what the final negotiation was before we signed off on it, we had to create a system and a checklist. So that's what you get in Premier Coaching. So this is an overview of the notes where we're going to explain the conceptual understandings behind it. But then if you want the comprehensive negotiation checklist, that's in Premier Coaching. And you can join Premier Coaching right now for free. So just go to premiercoaching.com. And obviously Premier Coaching is going to solve your 3 biggest problems: lead generation, systems, sales systems like what we just described. And also there's a ton in Premier Coaching that's going to help you truly differentiate yourself in the marketplace. It's going to help you create really, through Ethical Real Estate Professional, the brand that all the top agents in the country are going to be associated with. So just go to premiercoaching.com and check out what you get. And again, you can join Premier Coaching right now for free. And remember, when you join Premier Coaching, that includes a daily semi-private coaching call with a Harris certified coach. And again, the first 30 days is free. There's no contract. There's no risk. Go ahead and join premiercoaching.com right now.
Yes, and along with that, of course, you get your negotiating checklist. All right, part 1, know the property. Knowledge equals confidence. So before you negotiate, get the facts. Here's a quote from Mark Twain. He said, "Supposing is good, but finding out is better." So here's what you must know about the subject property prior to negotiating. Now, if you're a listing agent, you might know a lot of this already because you've been dealing with the listing. If you're the buyer's agent, you might have to go searching to find this information. And of course, you can always talk to each other, right? So there are 7 things that you've got to know about a property before you go after the negotiating process. Number 1, the MLS listing details. Now, that makes sense, right? But here's the thing. Read everything, including agent-to-agent comments.
So this is from the buyer side, right?
Well, I'm kind of handling it from both sides, but in this case, yes, from the buyer side.
Okay, can I add your first point?
Sure.
Though your first point was fantastic. One of the first things that you should do, and you don't have to do this every time, is drop the subject property into Google and find out, do you have that on your notes?
Yep.
Oh, no, that's history. But find out if there's anything going on with the sellers. Find out what the sellers' names are. Find out if you can, look at their LinkedIn profiles. Find out where the sellers might work. Find out as much as you can. Again, you don't have to do this on every listing, but when you're working, frankly, on a lot of upper end stuff, you're going to want to do as much homework on with regards to who the seller is and what their motivation might be to want to sell the property. For example, you might find out that the guy that owns the house that your buyer is interested in buying just sold his company for $1 trillion. And well, there you go. That's a useful bit of information to have when you're representing your buyer. Or you might find that maybe you're in Washington, D.C. and you looked in the LinkedIn profile and they worked at one of the companies or one of the agencies, let's say, with some aspect of the government where they probably just lost their job. That's another little juicy bit of information to have. Or you might see that someone, and again, looking at LinkedIn, just took a new job and you're in Ohio and they just took a new job and updated their LinkedIn profile that they're working in California from present, like the start date was today. Right. Well, that gives you a lot of insight into what's actually motivating that particular seller. Now my mind always goes back to competition. So if you're trying to win over, let's say in this particular case, a really great buyer, and you're working with, it's a really fantastic price range. Buyers, the best buyer in the world, all the boxes are checked. And the buyer is making you compete. They're trying to decide whether they're going to work with you or maybe they're going to work with, someone they know from, whatever, right? And you're showing them that this is your negotiation checklist. I mentioned this before, but you're also going to tell them before you start negotiating on any contract, you're going to be doing this, research on the prospective seller to find out where all what their motivation might be. Now, I want you to think about this from the opposite side. You're now representing the seller. You're on a listing appointment and you're explaining to the seller, same thing. When we get offers from these prospective buyers, we're going to be doing a lot of homework on them because we want to know what their motivation is as much as we can find out, because the co-op or the listing agent is not going to disclose any information that might put their client at a disadvantage, right? It's called agency, but the seller or the buyer may have done it themselves on social media. So find out. And there could be legal problems. The house could have just basically gone through who knows, right? But do your homework first so you can thoroughly negotiate in the best interest of your client.
Well, it might change your strategy, right? If you know some of these things. And what you're talking about might take 10 minutes to peruse online, see what you can come up with. Sometimes you're not going to have anything, but sometimes you'll have something that's really critical.
Well, the ironic part is that you might find that the agent who's representing, let's say the seller or the agent who's representing the buyer, doesn't actually know their client, doesn't know really the fact that, what the motivation truly is. And you might find yourself knowing more about that client than the agent that's actually representing them for all the reasons I just stated.
I could write a book about coaching calls where exactly that is what was going on.
Well, when you have a high level coaching call, it doesn't matter who the client is.
Yep.
You're going to ask them, I have 3 listing leads, and you're going to say, well, congratulations, that's fantastic. Where'd those listing leads came from? Mm-hmm. Well, 2 of them came from centers of influence and 1 of them came from a referral. All right, great. What's the seller's motivation? Like, why is that seller selling? And then they're going to say, well, I asked them that question. They're getting relocated. And da, da, da. Okay. And then an experienced agent, one of our coaching clients, is then going to say, well, then I went online and I found out these other things. And I found out these other things. Okay. When's the listing appointment? Well, the listing appointment is tomorrow at 3:00. Imagine walking into that seller's house, knowing exactly what their motivation truly is, knowing like what their time frame is, having sent a pre-listing pack. When you're walking into that house, talk about knowledge equals confidence and ignorance equals fear. You have maximum confidence because you know every bit of information there is to know about the prospective seller. And again, the same thing applies to on the buyer side. This is the way we want you guys to think, because it's going to give you an unfair advantage in the marketplace, especially when you're trying to prove your value. Ooh, you guys remember that?
You mean articulate.
Articulate your value, right, to your prospective clients.
Yes, that's right. So all of that goes into number one. We started talking about no from the MLS, where the agent-to-agent comments. Sometimes agents will tell you exactly what it's going to take to win. Tim talked about knowing more about the actual seller, and in some cases about the buyer as well. So point number two, key property details like clues such as not FHA approved. Maybe you're working with an FHA buyer and that kills your deal right there. Or seller financing available, or as is only, or curb offers only. It could be any number of those key property details.
Okay, so I'm going to drill down on this one because this one's really important. Julie and I talk about this a lot. Let's say, for example, the house has been listed before and you do some homework on it and you find out that it was listed, then it fell out of contract. You want to know why it fell out of contract. I know I'm covering one of your points, but you might discover that it fell out of contract because the house went through the inspection. The inspection then discovered that it had a bunch of problems on the house. And let's say it also was an FHA deal. So the FHA appraiser came out and he actually discovered some of the same issues. Now, that house, essentially, if let's say that the house is relisted at the same price it originally went in contract for, but it fell out of contract and now there's known issues and you have done this homework, if the seller didn't update that property inspection report, if they didn't disclose what they found out about after the house was in contract from the appraisal and from the actual inspection that previous buyer did on the property, you've got something there that's a negotiation point, because that's a seller that's not actually disclosing what they know about the property. And technically, the listing agent knows that there's things that the seller isn't disclosing on the property disclosure form. And that also gives you a bit of a leverage point if you think about it. So at the end of the day, you got to know everything about the seller. You got to know everything about the prospective buyer or prospective property, or buyer seller prospective property.
Yes.
Now, again, when you're working with new builds and new construction, a hell of a lot less to worry about.
That's true. And this whole first section is concentrating mostly on the property, but as relates to that, of course, the buyer and seller, you're talking about the history of the listing, the history of the house. Check online for MLS archives, Zillow, Google, YouTube. For example, was this a for sale by owner before? That's a big trend with FSBOs right now, is doing their own videos. So you can find out a lot about that.
Expireds are a lot of times what they're doing is they're going FSBO and before they relist. That's another big trend.
That's right. So maybe if you just look at the MLS, it might look like it was 20 days on the market. But if you do your archive and you look at YouTube, you find out maybe it was a for sale by owner for 6 months, then it expired after 2 agents, and now it's got 10 days on the fresh market.
And
right?
just to understand, though, what the description Julie just gave, an inexperienced prospective listing agent is going to go like, oh, crap, why would I want that listing? Whole market's passed over it. It's because the seller, the first year that they've been trying to take it on and off the market and FSBO it or list it and the rest of it, they weren't really that motivated, but now they actually are motivated. So there was no issue with the price, the condition, or the location. Just the seller wasn't ready to let it go, and now they are. Remember, the number one secret for being a powerful listing agent is, have the listing when it sells.
That's right. And oftentimes those sellers are actually really motivated by the time they've been through the gamut like that.
Right. And so the reason I mention these things is sometimes when we say things, I know that some of you are not understanding the intended connotation or the intended
meaning.
Yeah, exactly, of what we're trying to express to you. So expand your thinking and check yourself when you feel yourself recoiling towards an idea that we just shared with you. It's probably out of not understanding what we're trying to express. And we always slow ourselves down to try to really drill down so nothing gets by you guys. But it's up to you, obviously, to get our notes. So just go to harrisrealestatedaily.com and subscribe to the newsletter.
Okay, so we kind of mentioned this in number 4, days on the market. Is it a fresh listing or is it a stale property? Has it been pending before? If so, why? What happened? This is, again, all about knowing as much as you can about the house.
Should we talk about days on the market?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, in some MLSs, agents would...
They can reset, is what you're saying.
Right, they know how to reset the days on the market. So if you're just here's the worst case scenario. You're representing a buyer on a house, and the buyer finds out that the house was listed, like you're saying, Mr. Buyer, this house has only been on the market, look at the MLS for 7 days. But that buyer who's been looking at that particular market knows that the house was just relisted and it was on the market prior for 180 days, and you didn't know that. Now, you can't do this in all MLSs, what I'm about to tell you. And if you're representing the seller and your MLS lets you do this, you really should do what I'm about to say. But from a buyer's agent perspective, you better make sure if this is permitted in your MLS, that you're not letting this get by you. Again, represent your client. You could, as a listing agent, if your MLS lets you do this, you're crazy to let the days on the market look in the MLS be more than 30 days. And so you have, like, if your group or team, if you're an individual agent, this is obviously a lot harder to do. But one of the things you can do is you can rotate that listing or the listing agent ID number. You can change it every 2 weeks or change it every 30 days.
Some MLSs, this varies greatly. Some of them have outlawed doing that entirely. Some of them have virtually no rules where you can just basically take it out for 2 days, stick it back in, get a new MLS number and new days on the market.
Is there anything unethical with that from your perspective?
I think if you're refreshing, I think the best, most appropriate time to do that is like negative feedback. The seller paints it, gets rid of the cat pee, and now we reset it like it's a new listing. I don't think it's particularly.
I don't think it's unethical.
I don't either. Because you're representing your seller. You're trying to get the house sold for them.
Exactly. And a lot of buyer's agents, a lot of buyers will discount something and not even want to see it if the days in the market's more than like 30 days or 45 days.
Based on their opinion on what's a long day on the market.
Exactly. So it's your job as a listing agent,
yes,
if your MLS allows it, to have the lowest days on the market as possible. If they allow you to, if you have to switch around between license numbers, do it. Or like Julie said, it's sometimes just subject to a certain amount of time off.
It's pretty commonly 2 weeks, something like that.
Some of the bigger MLSs, though, it has to like switch brokerages and it has to be out of the MLS for like 30 days.
Well, you should know your rules is the bottom line.
Yeah, know your rules. And if you are able to do that as a listing agent, because you guys know that the best activity almost always happens in the first 2 weeks of a listing hitting the MLS. And all you'd have to do is update the pictures and update the descriptions. And give it a fresh days on the market. And that thing's going to sell because everyone's going to think it's a brand new listing.
Well, it's an old expired trick, isn't it?
Well, I mean, okay, so Julie's not going to get me talking about this, but it's true. One of the reasons you always want to be an expired listing agent is because oftentimes what will happen is just because you go out and you list a house that's an expired listing. You use our scripts, you proactively lead generate to them, you set the listing appointment, they're pre-qualified, send the pre-listing pack, you go on the appointment, you take the listing. The price is the same, the condition is the same, location is the same. Nothing changes. But you, of course, have new pictures, new descriptions. Days on the market now is restarted. The house sells immediately at the same price. No changes. And why? Just because it had new days on the market, just because the searches that agents set up on their automated searches or buyers do themselves are always just basically asking for the newest listings. And as soon as the listings pass, in some markets it's just a week, 7 days, 10 days, it doesn't show up in searches anymore because it's no longer classified as a new listing. You guys get it? I mean, this is something, if you can do this as a listing agent, you better be doing it. And if you're in a market where the listing agents can do that, you better be knowledgeable that the smart ones are doing it. Mm-hmm. So you can, again, inform the buyer that the true days in the market isn't the 3 days in the market. The true days in the market is the 365 days on the market.
That happened before this fresh listing, right? So if you're on the buyer side, how do you figure that out? You need to know how to use the archive or the history widget in your MLS. If you don't know how to do that, ask your broker, ask your coach, or take your MLS class for your CE credit.
And just for the record, again, my brain is always wired to think competitively because I want you guys to win. When you're on a listing appointment and you're in a market where the MLS lets you do that, if you don't show the seller, now do this after you have got the listing contract signed, but once you show the seller that you're going to be resetting the listing every so many days, so it's always showing as a new listing, the seller might not fully appreciate that, except if they're an expired. Because once they're an expired, they'll realize the importance of always showing up as a new listing because they'll remember when they were listed previously how the activity dropped like a rock after maybe the first month, probably the first 2 weeks. And so it'll always have that new fresh listing look, smell, and feel, basically.
Very well said. Okay, so moving on. Again, we're talking about the house mostly here. Active competition. How many similar homes are available? Is it 0? And if they want to live in that neighborhood or anywhere near it, it's the only choice? Are there a few things competing that are still active? Are there a flood of options? The answer affects your negotiation leverage. Is there new construction that this home competes with? How does it stack up versus its competition? Does it even have any competition? There's places I help coaching clients with this all the time. If a house isn't selling right away and we look at what are those comps, I did one with an agent last week in Texas. They had a really nice, just beautiful, gorgeous $1 million plus home. But the problem was there's 20 others that are variations of those in the same school district with the same amount of land that are basically the same age, and right around the corner you could build whatever you wanted to for $1 million.
We should say this. This isn't the perfect time to interject this, but you're getting me motivated to think about this because I've had a lot of coaching calls like that too, especially with the people in our EXP Realty group.
Yes.
So we've got like 3,400 agents in our EXP Realty group, and Julie and I, obviously, when you're with EXP Realty, you have an advantage of and you're with us, you have the advantage of that Premier Coaching is included. So we have opportunities to talk a lot with these agents really all over the country. And we have, I think, in 7 different countries as well, but the ones primarily in the United States. There's no doubt that January was slow for sales. There's no doubt that the beginning of February was slow for sales. But I'll tell you right now, there's absolutely no doubt, and I can see it from the close and the pendings, that we're really boiling up fast for a really amazing spring season. So make sure, and this is to the point that Julie got me on this, one of the biggest surprise elements that I'm hearing directly from our EXP Realty family, and you guys are experiencing this as well, is how absolutely ruthless new construction is to the prices of resale homes. And even if a resale home is in a better, more established area, most buyers right now, and I would say in most price ranges, are shopping payment. Payment is so important because interest rates are 7%. And so the builders are buying these rates down, in some cases to the high 4%. And Julie and I have talked about this many, many times on this podcast. It's really important that you guys understand this. You need to know how to actually position your resale homes to compete with the new construction homes based off payment. So even if the new construction home, you guys think because the new construction is more expensive than your resale home, the new construction is at a disadvantage. What you're not studying, because maybe you're just listening to this podcast first time, maybe you've listened a million times, but you just aren't listening, is the fact that the resale has a huge disadvantage to the new construction, even when the new construction is more expensive, because the payment is less. And the payment is less because the builder is taking sometimes $25,000, $35,000, even more in upper end price ranges, and they're buying down the interest rate. So they literally have made an agreement with a bank or whoever, and they're essentially prepaying the interest on the mortgage on behalf of the prospective buyer, the build client, and they're getting that monthly payment down. And oftentimes these are 30-year fixed rate mortgages. Mm-hmm. So they're able, like you're in a marketplace where your resale is $700,000, new construction, similar, let's say square footage and all the rest of it, but obviously one is new, one is old. Your resale is in a better location, closer to town and everything. And, you'd think on paper, well, further away, $300,000 more or less desirable, but you're not realizing that the new construction is basically, they hit the cheat code and they're underpriced, they're making the payments less by a large amount, and they're offering more amenities, and they're offering more modern floor plans.
And you don't have to worry about inspections or any of the rest of it.
Right. And that's what I was hearing when I was talking to all the folks in our EXP Realty group, how they, a lot of them listen to our podcast every day, and they're saying, like, you and Julie have been warning us about new construction for the last 3 years.
It's coming.
And well, they're saying that for the first time, this is the first spring market where the builders have been buying land, they've been subdividing, they've been getting ready. This is the year where they're really going to hit the market with a lot of new product. And so you guys have got to be very, very well informed of the new construction in your marketplace. Julie and I have done countless podcasts about this. We've told you, frankly, how you can be part of the new construction, I think, boom that's going to happen on most of the major markets in the United States. If you're not yet aware of that, make sure you join Premier Coaching at premiercoaching.com. If you're in our EXP Realty group, remember you're entitled to Premier Coaching for free. If you're interested in joining EXP Realty and you have not yet chosen a sponsor yet, and you would like to be part of our EXP Realty group, you can text me directly at 512-758-0206 if you need any help filling out the application. Otherwise, at the bottom of today's show description, whether you're on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify, there's a link that you can just click to go to our EXP Realty group. Watch the videos, learn more about why thousands of agents, like 12 or 1,300 agents joined with us last year. You can understand the importance of choosing your sponsor. Frankly, that really matters more than you might believe. And then, yes, if you're ready to join EXP and you have not yet chosen a sponsor, we're formally applying for the job of being your sponsor. Click the link below. If you've got any questions, or maybe if you're a team or a brokerage, you need to speak with me directly, text me at 512-758-0206.
All right, so part 2. The first part was mostly about the house. The second part is about knowing the seller's priorities. And we can get into, I think you're ready to wrap.
Well, I mean, I have to get on another Zoom. So let's talk more about this tomorrow.
And they can also catch the notes.
Yes, exactly. So if you guys want all the notes, I said there were a lot of notes from today's show. Make sure you just go to harrisrealestatedaily.com. And that is our daily newsletter. The subscription to the Harris newsletter is absolutely free. In the meantime, guys, thank you for all the positive feedback on all the shows we've been doing. We made a commitment to really take our podcast to the next level. And based on the number of new listeners we're getting, it's definitely resonating with all of you. So make sure you do consider giving us a 5-star review over on iTunes and leaving a pithy comment. I think we've had 20 so far this year, 20 or 22. So I really appreciate that. And if you need us for anything, remember the best way to communicate with Julie and I, if you have any show ideas, questions, topics, is just message us over on Instagram. And we're at Tim and Julie Harris. Thanks and have a fantastic day.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.